The Child Who Remembered the Day Humanity Ended, Part 1. Shadow Prophet Eye Story. The first time the child spoke about the day the sky cracked open, it was a quiet Tuesday morning in October. Dr. Helena Ward was sitting in her office at St. Alden's Behavioral Clinic, reviewing the usual folder of patient summaries, developmental delays, sensory disorders, speech issues, when she noticed a new file slipped under her door. It wasn't in the hospital's standard blue cardstock. It was black. Her name wasn't printed on it. It was handwritten, and underneath her name was a single instruction: "You're the only one he'll talk to." Helena frowned, slid her thumb under the seal, and opened the folder. Inside was a short description. Patient Elias Mercer, age 5, referral reason, claims to remember the day humanity ended. Symptoms: night terrors, dissociative episodes, temporal disorientation, advanced vocabulary during episodes. She stopped reading at the last line. Child insists he is remembering a life he has not yet lived. Helena exhaled. Children had active imaginations. Trauma often manifested in strange metaphors. It wasn't unusual for a young mind to invent fantasy explanations for internal fears. But something about this was different. A 5-year-old talking about humanity ending? A 5-year-old describing events from a life in the future? She tapped the paper twice, a habit left over from graduate school, and stood. "All right, Elias," she murmured to herself. "Let's see what you've got." The first session. Elias was sitting on the carpeted floor of the playroom when Helena entered. Small, pale, dark hair hanging over eyes that were far too old for his face. He wasn't drawing, or playing, or fidgeting. He was staring at the window, as if he expected something to be outside. "Hello, Elias," Helena said gently. He didn't turn. Instead, he whispered, "It hasn't cracked yet." Helena blinked. "Excuse me?" "The sky," he said, lifting a small finger toward the cloudy afternoon. "It's still closed, but it won't stay that way." Most children spoke with uncertainty, but Elias spoke like someone remembering. Helena knelt beside him. "Who told you that?" Elias turned then, slowly, cautiously, and looked her directly in the eyes. "No one told me," he said. "I've seen it." "Seen what?" "The end of everything." A chill crept up Helena's arms. Still, she kept her voice calm. "Elias, can you tell me when this happened?" He nodded. "I was older, much older, maybe 30, or maybe 70. Time didn't work right near the end." Helena tried to mask her reaction. "You're saying you were alive during the end of humanity?" "Yes." "How old were you?" He thought for a long moment. "Old enough to make the deal." Helena's throat tightened. "What deal?" His lower lip trembled, not in fear, but in conflict, as if he were choosing which truth to reveal. "I asked to come back," he said softly. "I asked to return to before it happened, so I could warn people, so I could stop it, so I wouldn't die again." His voice cracked on the last word. Helena swallowed. Children didn't talk like this. Adults barely talked like this. "Elias," she said slowly, "what exactly did you see happen?" He closed his eyes, and the words that came next did not belong to a 5-year-old. "The sky split like skin. It started with a sound," Elias whispered. "A sound like the world was breathing in for the last time. Then a line appeared across the sky, just a thin line at first, like someone drawing with light. He spread his small hands apart, and then it opened." Helena didn't speak, couldn't speak. It wasn't a storm. It wasn't clouds. It was a tear, a rip in the world, like the sky wasn't sky at all, just paper stretched too thin. His breathing quickened, and through the tear something was watching us. Not a creature, not a god, just something that had been waiting. Helena finally forced her voice to work. "What happened next?" Elias shook his head violently. "No, I don't want to remember the middle part. Only the end, the very end." "The end of humanity?" He nodded. "And you remember this from another life?" "No," he swallowed. "From my last life." Helena's breaking point. Helena stood up abruptly and walked to the corner of the room. Her hands were shaking. Past life memories existed in fringe psychology, but no verified cases had ever been documented, certainly not predicting future events. But Elias wasn't finished. "You don't believe me now," he said without accusation. "But you will." Helena turned. "When?" "When the sky makes that sound again," he whispered, "just before it tears open." "Elias," he held up his hand, small, trembling, but commanding silence like someone far older. "I need you to listen to me, Dr. Ward." She froze. Because I made the deal to come back, and I wasn't the only one. A chill slid down her spine. What do you mean? Elias leaned forward so slowly it was almost unnatural. They don't come back alone. The recordings that night, Helena listened to the session audio 3 times. The first time for comprehension, the second for analysis, the third because she couldn't shake the feeling that Elias wasn't imagining any of this. His tone, his details, the specificity of his phrasing. Most children described emotions. Elias described events. Events with structure, with timeline, with consequences. She checked his referral history again. Night terrors since age 2. Drawings of the crack in the sky since age 3. Episodes of speaking in unfamiliar languages. Moments where he woke up claiming to be someone else. And then one line stood out. Child occasionally wakes up weeping, saying, "I died again." Helena closed the folder and pressed her fingers to her temples. This was not ordinary trauma, not even extraordinary trauma. Whatever Elias was describing, he believed it to be real. The snore portion, the second session, the deal. Elias entered quietly and sat cross-legged on the mat. Before Helena could begin, he asked, "Do you remember dreams after you wake up?" "Sometimes," she answered. Elias nodded like this confirmed something. "I remember dying." Helena steadied herself. "How?" "It wasn't violent," he said. "It was slow. Everyone died slow, because it wasn't killing us, it was erasing us." Her skin prickled. "What was?" "The thing behind the sky." He pointed upward. "The one that watches." "Elias," she asked, "why would it erase humanity?" He shrugged. "To make room." "For what?" "For the ones who come after." Helena's heartbeat felt heavy. "And the deal you mentioned," she said. "What was it?" Elias looked at her, and the expression on his 5-year-old face did not belong to a child. "When the last of us was nearly gone," he said softly, "I begged it to let me undo what happened." "And it agreed?" "Yes." "What did you give it?" Elias hesitated. "My lives," he whispered. Helena felt the air leave her lungs. "What do you mean, your lives?" "I don't get to keep them anymore," Elias said. "I keep coming back, over and over, and every time I fail, the sky cracks again." His eyes filled, not just with tears, with memory. "But this time, something is wrong." "What's wrong?" Elias looked past her, over her shoulder, at something only he could see. "They came with me," he whispered, "the ones who were erased." The hallway incident session ended early when Elias refused to speak further. But as Helena escorted him down the hall, the fluorescent lights began to flicker. Every bulb, every fixture, one by one. Elias froze. Helena knelt. "What is it? Elias, talk to me." He lifted a shaking hand toward the ceiling. "They're looking for me." Helena's breath stilled. "Who?" He leaned close to her ear. "The ones who didn't make the deal." The hallway lights went out, every single one. For 3 full seconds, the clinic was submerged in darkness. When they flickered back on, Elias was holding Helena's wrist with a grip that no 5-year-old should have had. "Dr. Ward," he whispered, "they remember you too." The child who remembered the day humanity ended, Part 2 and 3, Part 2, the ones who came back. The fracture in memory. The lights returned to the hallway of St. Alden's Behavioral Clinic with a reluctant flicker, as though the electricity itself was uncertain whether it wanted to illuminate what stood in that corridor. And Helena Ward found herself staring down at the small hand gripping her wrist with a strength that defied every principle of pediatric physiology she had learned in her decades of practice. A grip that spoke not of childish fear, but of something far older, far more desperate, far more aware of what darkness meant and what moved within it. "They remember you too." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, like prophecy, like the kind of statement that once spoken could never be taken back and would forever divide Helena's life into the time before she heard them and the time after. She forced herself to breathe. Forced herself to maintain the professional composure that had carried her through countless sessions with traumatized children, with patients who saw things that weren't there, with minds that had fractured under pressures she could only imagine. But this was different. This was Elias. And something in the way the lights had died, simultaneously, completely, as if responding to a command rather than a malfunction, made her suspect that whatever this child was describing wasn't imagination or trauma or the elaborate fantasy of a disturbed mind. It was memory, real memory. memory of things that hadn't happened yet, but somehow, impossibly, already had. Elias, she said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will, we need to get you back to the playroom. We need to talk about what just happened. The boy released her wrist slowly, his dark eyes still fixed on a point somewhere above and behind her, tracking something she couldn't see, but whose presence she could feel. A weight in the air, a pressure against her consciousness, the unmistakable sensation of being observed by something that existed just beyond the threshold of perception. They can't follow us there, he said. Not yet. The playroom has too many colors. They don't like colors. They remember when everything was gray. Helena didn't ask what he meant. She didn't want to know. Instead, she took his hand, gently this time, professionally, the way she had held countless children's hands during her career, and led him back down the corridor, past the flickering lights that seemed to steady as they moved, past doorways that felt somehow darker than they should have been, past the reception desk where her colleague Marcus was staring at his computer screen with an expression of profound confusion. "Helena," he called out as they passed. "Did you see that? Every system in the building just crashed for 3 seconds. IT says there's no explanation. No surge, no outage, no—" "Later, Marcus," she said, and something in her tone made him stop talking immediately. The playroom was exactly as they had left it, bright, warm, filled with the organized chaos of therapeutic toys and drawing materials, and the carefully curated environment designed to make children feel safe. But as Helena closed the door behind them, she noticed that Elias wasn't looking at any of it. He was looking at her, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're starting to believe," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm starting to listen." Helena corrected carefully. "There's a difference." "No," Elias said, shaking his head with a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere far beyond his 5 years of life. "There isn't. Not with this. Listening is believing. Because once you hear the truth, you can't unhear it. And once you believe, even a little—" He trailed off. "What?" Helena prompted. "They can find you." The words sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. "Elias," she said, settling into the chair across from him, forcing herself to approach this the way she would approach any session, methodically, professionally, gathering information before drawing conclusions. "I need you to explain something to me. These beings you're describing, the ones who came back with you, who are they?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had changed, deeper, older, carrying the weight of memories that no child should possess. "They're us," he said. "They're humanity, the ones who died when the sky opened, the ones who were erased when the thing behind the world decided we were finished." Helena felt her throat tighten. "I don't understand. If they're human, why would they be dangerous? Why would they be looking for you?" "Because I made the deal without asking them," Elias whispered. "Because when I begged for the chance to come back and try again, I didn't just bring myself. I brought everyone who died, everyone who was erased, all 8 billion of them." The number hung in the air between them like a physical weight. "But they're not alive," Elias continued, "not the way we're alive. They're echoes, impressions, the last moment of every human who ever existed, frozen in the instant before they were unmade. And they're angry. They're so angry, Dr. Ward, because I promised them I could fix it. I promised them I could stop the ending from happening, and I've failed. Over and over and over. I've lived this life hundreds of times, maybe thousands, and every single time the sky cracks open, and they die again, and they come back with me, and they remember." His voice broke. "They remember every death, every failure, every time I couldn't save them." Helena's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against her knees to still them. "Elias," she said slowly, "how many times have you lived through this specific timeline?" The boy looked at her with eyes that held centuries. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "The numbers stopped meaning anything a long time ago. But I remember every single ending, every single time the sky cracked, every single moment when humanity disappeared. And I remember you." Helena's breath caught. "You remember me?" Elias nodded. "You're always there," he said. "At the end. Every time. Sometimes you're trying to help me. Sometimes you're trying to stop me. Sometimes you don't believe until it's too late. But you're always there. That's why they remember you too. That's why they're looking for you. Because whatever happens next, you're part of it. You've always been part of it. Helena wanted to stand up, wanted to walk out of this room and pretend this conversation had never happened, wanted to return to the comfortable certainty of her professional life, where children had ordinary traumas and extraordinary symptoms, but nothing that challenged the fundamental nature of reality itself. But she couldn't, because somewhere deep inside her, in a place she hadn't known existed until this moment, something was responding to Elias's words, something that felt less like surprise and more like recognition, as if some part of her had always known this was coming, as if some part of her remembered too. Sith, the weight of revelation. That night, Helena didn't go home. She sat in her office with the lights off, staring at the ceiling, turning Elias's words over and over in her mind like stones being polished by endless examination, each repetition revealing new facets, new implications, new horrors that she wasn't sure she was prepared to face. They remember you too. What did that mean? What could it possibly mean? She was a behavioral psychologist in a small clinic in the Pacific Northwest. She had never done anything significant enough to be remembered by anyone except her patients and her family. She had certainly never done anything that would make her relevant to the end of humanity. And yet Elias had spoken with such certainty, such absolute conviction. The kind of conviction that didn't come from imagination or delusion, but from knowledge, from the unshakable foundation of having experienced something so many times that doubt had become impossible. Helena pulled up her computer and began to research. Past life memories, prophetic children, cases of young patients describing events they couldn't possibly know about. The literature was sparse, but fascinating. Accounts of children who remembered being soldiers in wars that ended before they were born, who spoke languages no one in their families had ever taught them, who described places they had never visited with accuracy that defied explanation. But none of them described the future. None of them talked about the end of humanity. None of them mentioned deals with entities that existed behind the sky. She closed her laptop and rubbed her eyes. This was insane. She was a scientist, a rationalist. She didn't believe in prophecies or cosmic entities or the possibility that a 5-year-old child might be a time traveler who had witnessed the extinction of the human race. And yet, the lights, the grip on her wrist, the way Elias spoke, not with the uncertainty of a child inventing stories, but with the weary certainty of someone who had told this story so many times they could no longer muster enthusiasm for its telling. Helena made a decision. Tomorrow, she would ask Elias to tell her everything, the complete story, every detail he could remember. And she would record it, not just the audio, but video, documentation, everything necessary to either prove or disprove what he was claiming. Because if he was right, if even a fraction of what he described was true, then the world needed to know. And if he was wrong, if this was elaborate delusion, complex trauma, some form of psychosis she had never encountered, then she needed to understand it well enough to help him. Either way, she was committed now. Either way, she was part of this. She had always been part of this. That's what he had said. And despite every rational instinct screaming at her to dismiss it, some deeper part of Helena suspected he might be right. The full testimony, the third session, began at dawn. Helena had requested a private room, not the playroom this time, but one of the consultation suites used for family meetings, with comfortable furniture and soft lighting and walls thick enough to ensure complete privacy. She had set up 3 cameras at different angles. She had prepared recording equipment that would capture every word in crystal clarity. She had coffee, too much coffee, and a notepad filled with questions she had been formulating since midnight. Elias arrived with his foster mother, a tired-looking woman named Margaret, who seemed relieved to hand him off to someone else for a few hours. He was up all night, Margaret said quietly as she left. Talking in his sleep. Languages I've never heard. Names I don't recognize. Names? Helena asked. Hundreds of them, Margaret said. Like he was reading a list, a very long list. She shuddered. I'll pick him up at noon. And then Helena was alone with Elias. He looked even paler than yesterday, thinner, somehow, as if the weight of his memories was physically draining him. He sat in the large armchair across from her and immediately looked at the cameras. "You're recording this," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I need to," Helena explained. "I need a complete record of everything you tell me, so I can study it, so I can understand." Elias nodded slowly. "That's what you always do," he said. "Every time. You always want to record it. Does it help?" "Sometimes. Not usually, but sometimes." Helena steadied herself. "Elias, I want you to tell me everything, from the beginning, the full story of what you experienced, what you remember, what happened at the end of humanity. Take as much time as you need. I'm not going anywhere." The boy looked at her for a long moment, and then he began. "From the beginning. I don't know when I was originally born," Elias said. "I mean, I know when I was born in this body, 5 years ago, in a hospital in Seattle, to parents who died in a car accident when I was 2. But my first life, the original one, I don't remember how it started, only how it ended." He pulled his knees up to his chest, making himself small. "I was old, very old, older than anyone had a right to be, because time had started moving strangely by then. Days lasted for weeks, nights lasted for months. The sun didn't set properly anymore. It just hung there, trembling, like it was afraid to touch the horizon." Helena felt her pen stop moving. "Afraid?" she asked. "Everything was afraid by the end," Elias said. "Even the sun, even the stars, even the ground under our feet. Because they all knew what was coming. They could feel it getting closer." He closed his eyes. "The first signs appeared about 20 years before the end. Small things, shadows that didn't match their sources, reflections that moved a half-second too slow, sounds that seemed to come from directions that didn't exist. People noticed, but nobody wanted to talk about it. Everyone pretended everything was normal, because the alternative, admitting that something was fundamentally wrong with reality, was too terrifying to contemplate. But the signs kept getting worse. Children started being born who could remember the future. Old people started forgetting the past, not like dementia, but like the past itself was being erased, like their memories were being stolen by something that needed them more than they did. And then the sky started changing." Helena leaned forward. "How did it change?" Elias's eyes opened, and for a moment, Helena could have sworn she saw something ancient looking out through them, something that had witnessed things no human mind was designed to process. "It got heavier," he said. "I know that doesn't make sense, but that's how it felt, like the sky itself was pressing down on us, like whatever was on the other side was leaning against the barrier between our world and wherever it came from. The pressure built for years. People started getting headaches that nothing could cure. Animals started behaving strangely, dogs howling at empty corners, birds flying in spirals until they collapsed. The ocean tides stopped following the moon and started following something else. And then, on the last day, the sky cracked." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "It wasn't dramatic at first, just a thin line of light appearing where no light should be, like someone had drawn a single stroke across the atmosphere with a blade made of pure radiance. But the line grew, it widened, and through the gap we could see." He stopped, swallowed, tried to continue. "We could see the truth." Helena pressed. Elias looked at her with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 endings. "That the sky wasn't sky," he said. "That what we thought was atmosphere and space and stars was actually a membrane, a barrier, a wall built to keep us separate from what exists on the other side. And on the other side," he shuddered, "there was an eye." Helena's blood went cold. "An eye?" "Not like our eyes. Not an eye that belonged to a face or a body or anything that we would recognize as alive. It was an eye the way a black hole is an eye, a point of focus, a center of attention, a place where all observation converged. And it was looking at us. It had been looking at us for a very long time. Waiting, watching, deciding, and when the sky finally cracked open enough for it to see us clearly, it decided we were finished." The unmaking. Elias's testimony continued for 3 hours. He described the final days of humanity in detail that no child could have invented, the way reality itself began to dissolve as the eye's attention fell upon it, the way people didn't die so much as unbecome, their existence retroactively edited out of the fabric of the universe as if they had never been born at all. He described the panic, the prayers, the desperate attempts to close the sky with weapons and technology and faith, none of which had any effect because you cannot wound something that exists outside the dimension where wounding is possible. He described watching his family disappear, not die, not even cease to exist, but simply stop having ever existed. Watching his memories of them dissolve like sugar in water, watching photographs bleach themselves blank, watching gravestones become smooth and unmarked, watching history rewrite itself to eliminate any evidence that these people had ever walked the earth. The worst part, Elias said, his voice hollow, wasn't dying. It was forgetting. It was watching everyone you love become nothing, and then feeling yourself start to become nothing too, and knowing that soon there would be no one left to remember that any of this had ever happened. By the end, I was one of the last. I don't know why. Maybe because I was old enough that my existence had deep roots in the timeline. Maybe because I was in a place the eye hadn't looked yet. Maybe just luck. But I knew I was going to be next. I could feel myself starting to fade, the edges of my body getting blurry, my memories getting foggy, my sense of self, the knowledge of who I was and why I mattered, slipping away like water through fingers. Helena watched him, her pen forgotten, her professional detachment utterly abandoned. "And that's when you made the deal," she said. Elias nodded. "I didn't plan it. I didn't even know it was possible. I was so desperate, so terrified of becoming nothing, so horrified by what had happened to everyone I loved." And I screamed. Not with my voice. I didn't have a voice anymore by then. With my mind. With whatever was left of my consciousness. With the last fragment of my existence that hadn't been unmade yet. I screamed at the eye. I demanded to know why. Why it was doing this. Why it had chosen us. Why humanity had to end. Helena's throat was dry. And it answered. It noticed me. Elias's face twisted with the memory. For one infinite moment, the entire attention of that thing focused on the last trace of what had once been a human being named Elias Mercer. And I felt. He struggled for words. I felt seen, completely seen. Every thought I had ever had, every choice I had ever made, every moment of my existence, all of it laid bare before something that existed so far beyond human comprehension that comparing us to it was like comparing bacteria to galaxies. And in that moment of total exposure, total vulnerability, total nakedness before an intelligence that could unmake reality itself, I made my request. "What did you ask for?" Helena whispered. "I asked to try again. I asked to go back to before the sky cracked. I asked for the chance to find a way to stop it. I asked to save everyone. And the eye, the thing behind the sky, whatever it is, it laughed." Elias shuddered. Not a sound, more like a vibration in the fabric of existence itself, a tremor of amusement that shook the remnants of the universe. And then it spoke. What did it say? Elias looked at Helena with an expression of absolute devastation. It said, "Try. The terms of the deal." "The eye gave me a chance," Elias continued. "But it wasn't free. It wasn't mercy. It was entertainment. I think it found me amusing. This tiny fragment of consciousness, one of 8 billion that it had just casually erased, having the audacity to ask for another attempt, the arrogance of it, the absurdity. So it gave me what I asked for. It sent me back, to before the cracking, to a point in time early enough that maybe, I could find a way to prevent what was coming. But there were conditions." Helena leaned forward. "What conditions?" "First, I would return as a child. I would have my memories, but I would be trapped in a body without the resources, the authority, the credibility to act on what I knew. I would have to convince adults to believe me, to help me, to take action based on the testimony of a child who claimed to remember the end of the world. You can imagine how well that went." Helena thought of all the files she had read, all the diagnoses that had been applied to Elias over his short life. Delusional disorder, schizoaffective symptoms, possible early-onset psychosis. Nobody had believed him. Of course nobody had believed him. "Second," Elias continued, "I would remember every failure. If I couldn't stop the sky from cracking, I would experience the end again, and then I would be sent back again, and again, and again, for as long as the eye found it amusing, for as long as my desperation entertained it. How many times? Helena asked. I stopped counting at 300. The number hit her like a physical blow. 300 times, 300 childhoods, 300 attempts to warn a world that wouldn't listen, 300 apocalypses. Third, Elias said, and his voice grew even quieter, I would not come back alone. Helena's skin prickled. The others, the ones who were erased. Yes. Every time I return, they return with me. Not as living beings, not as people who get second chances the way I do, just as echoes, impressions, the last conscious moments of 8 billion humans, frozen in the instant before they stopped existing. They're aware, they remember, they experience the loops the same way I do, watching me fail, watching themselves die again, watching the eye laugh at our pathetic attempts to escape a fate it has already decided. And they're angry. They're so angry, Dr. Ward, because I promised them I could fix it, and I can't. I can never fix it. No matter what I try, no matter what I do differently, the sky always cracks. The eye always looks through. Humanity always ends. And we all get sent back to do it again. Helena was crying. She hadn't noticed when the tears started. Elias, she said, her voice breaking, why does it keep happening? If you've tried hundreds of times, if you've done everything differently, why can't you stop it? The boy looked at her with infinite sadness. Because I'm not supposed to stop it, he said. The deal was never about giving me a real chance. It was about giving the eye something to watch, a show, a drama, a tiny creature struggling against the inevitable, failing over and over, generating fresh despair each time it loops back. The eye feeds on our suffering, on our hope that this time will be different, on the crushing disappointment when it isn't. I'm not trying to save humanity. I'm entertaining something that finds our extinction amusing. Helena's tears fell faster. Then why do you keep trying? If you know it's hopeless, if you know the deal was rigged from the start, why don't you just give up? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Because every time I start again, he said finally, I meet you. Helena's breath caught. What? You're always there, Dr. Ward, in every timeline. Sometimes you're my doctor. Sometimes you're my teacher. Sometimes you're just someone I pass on the street. But you're always there. And every time I tell you what I know, every time I watch you struggle to believe me, every time I see the moment when you finally understand, he smiled, a small, sad expression that looked ancient on his young face. You give me hope. Even though it's hopeless, you give me hope. Because you always try to help, even when you know it won't work, even when you've seen 100 endings yourself, even when the sky's already cracking and there's nothing either of us can do. You always try. And that matters. That's the only thing that's ever mattered. Even when you cease, the echoes emerge. The session ended at noon as scheduled. Margaret picked up Elias, looking even more exhausted than she had that morning, and Helena was left alone with hours of footage that she knew would change everything if she could convince anyone to believe it. But before she could begin reviewing the recordings, the lights in her office flickered, then went out. Helena froze. The darkness was absolute, not the ordinary darkness of a power outage, where ambient light from windows and emergency exits provided some illumination, but a darkness so complete it seemed to have substance, to press against her skin with physical weight. And in that darkness, she heard voices. Thousands of them. Millions. Whispering in languages she didn't recognize, speaking words that seemed to form just at the edge of comprehension before dissolving into static. Promised us. He promised he would save us. 300 times we've died. 300 times we've watched it happen. And you were there. Every time. You were there when we ended. Helena's heart hammered in her chest. Who's there? She demanded, hating the tremor in her voice. The whispers paused. Then a single voice emerged from the chorus, clearer than the others, speaking with an authority that made the air vibrate. We are what remains. We are the 8 billion. We are the last thought of every human who ever lived. And we remember you, Helena Ward. The darkness seemed to deepen, if such a thing were possible. We remember you standing beside him as the sky cracked open. We remember you trying to protect him as reality dissolved. We remember you being the last to disappear, always the last, holding his hand as both of you stopped existing. We remember, and we are tired of dying. Helena forced herself to speak. What do you want? The voice paused. We want what Elias promised us. We want salvation. We want to stop being erased and reborn and erased again. We want to exist, truly exist, not as echoes, not as memories, not as the playthings of something that feeds on our despair. We want to be real again, and you're going to help us. How? Helena whispered. By doing what you always do, by trying, by fighting, by being the one person in every timeline who never gives up. Elias is the key, but you are the lock. He can open the door, but only you can hold it open. This time will be different. This time, we will make it different. Because this time, you're going to remember too. Helena felt something cold touch her forehead, a pressure that seemed to reach past her skin, past her skull, past every barrier that protected her consciousness from things it wasn't designed to contain. And then the darkness was filled with visions. Lifetimes of visions. 300 endings compressed into a single moment of terrible clarity. She saw herself as a doctor, as a teacher, as a stranger on the street. She saw herself meeting Elias in 100 different ways. She saw herself believing him, doubting him, fighting alongside him, dying beside him. She saw the sky crack open. She saw the eye look through. She saw humanity disappear, over and over and over. And she felt, for the first time, what it was like to be unmade. Not to die, to cease, to have every trace of her existence erased from the universe as if she had never been born. The sensation was beyond horror, beyond terror, beyond any emotion she had words for. It was the ultimate violation, not just of life, but of meaning itself. And she understood in that moment why the echoes were so angry, why they had transcended death itself to remain present in the loops, why they were willing to do anything to escape the cycle. Because existing as an echo, as a memory of a memory, as the faint impression of someone who had been erased, was still better than the alternative. Still better than ceasing completely. Still better than being nothing at all. The visions ended. The lights came back on. Helena was on her knees, gasping for breath, her face wet with tears she didn't remember crying. And on her desk, written in a hand that was not her own, was a message. The sky cracks in 7 days. This time, you will remember. This time you will fight. This time, we will not let you forget. Part 3. The Final Crack 7th. The Gathering Storm. The days that followed were unlike anything Helena had experienced, or perhaps unlike anything she had allowed herself to remember experiencing. Because now that she knew what to look for, she could see the signs everywhere, the shadows that didn't quite match their sources, the reflections that moved a fraction too slow, the sounds that seemed to come from directions that didn't exist. The world was wrong, and it had been wrong for a long time. She just hadn't noticed before. Or rather, she had noticed but forgotten, the way everyone forgot, the way the human mind naturally edited out information that challenged its understanding of reality. But now she couldn't forget. The echoes wouldn't let her. They whispered to her in quiet moments, reminding her of truths she had known in other lifetimes. They showed her flashes of memory, her own memories, from versions of herself that had lived and died and been erased in timelines she had no conscious recollection of. They kept her aware. And awareness, she was learning, was both a gift and a burden. Because now she could see what was coming. She could feel the sky getting heavier. She could sense the pressure building, the eye pressing against the barrier between dimensions, testing its strength, waiting for the moment when it could crack through again. 7 days. That's what the message had said. 7 days until the sky cracked. 7 days until humanity ended. 7 days until everything she loved, everyone she had ever known, was erased from existence as if they had never been, unless she could find a way to stop it. 8. The Council of the Forgotten. On the third day, the echoes called a meeting. Helena didn't know how she knew where to go. The information simply appeared in her mind, like a memory she had always possessed but only now accessed. An abandoned church on the outskirts of the city. Midnight. Alone. She drove through empty streets that seemed darker than they should have been, past buildings that looked somehow less real than she remembered, as if reality itself was beginning to fray at the edges in anticipation of what was coming. The church was small, white, forgotten by time and congregation alike. Its windows were dark, its doors hung open, and inside, Helena found herself surrounded by shadows, not the absence of light, presence of darkness. Shadows that had form, that had depth, that had the suggestion of faces and bodies and the unmistakable weight of consciousness. 8 billion shadows, 8 billion echoes, 8 billion humans who had been erased and refused to disappear completely. And at the center of them all, illuminated by a single shaft of moonlight coming through a broken window, stood Elias. Not the 5-year-old body he inhabited now, something older. Something that showed the accumulated weight of 300 lifetimes. Something that looked at Helena with eyes that had seen more endings than any consciousness should be able to contain. "You came," he said, and his voice was different too, deeper, more resonant, carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the thousands of shadows surrounding them. "Did I have a choice?" Helena asked. "You always have a choice," Elias said. "That's the one thing the Eye never understood. It can control circumstances. It can manipulate outcomes. It can rig every game and stack every deck, but it can't take away choice. That's why you matter, Helena. That's why you're here. Because no matter what it does, no matter how hopeless things get, you always choose to try." The shadows around them stirred, a rustling like wind through dead leaves, a whisper that contained multitudes. "She must know," they said. "She must understand. If she is to help us, she must see." Elias nodded. "They're right. You need to understand what we're really fighting, not just the sky cracking, not just the eye looking through, the whole thing, the reason it happens, the purpose behind the ending." Helena stepped closer, her fear overshadowed by a desperate need to know. "Tell me," she said. "Ix, the truth behind the sky." "The eye isn't evil," Elias began. "I know that sounds wrong after everything I've told you. After describing what it does to us, what it's done 300 times, what it will do again in 4 days if we can't stop it. But it's not evil. It's not malicious. It doesn't hate us or want us to suffer. It's just different." The shadows murmured agreement. "Imagine you're watching an anthill," Elias continued. "You see the ants going about their business, building tunnels, gathering food, raising young. They have their own complexity, their own society, their own form of consciousness. But you're not an ant. You can't understand what it's like to be an ant. And if you decide to destroy the anthill, maybe because you're building something there, maybe because the ants are inconvenient, maybe just because you can, you don't feel guilt. You don't feel anything. Because to you, the ants aren't real the way you're real. They're just patterns, processes, things that move and change without possessing whatever it is that makes existence meaningful. That's what we are to the eye." Helena's stomach twisted. "Ants? Less than ants. At least ants exist in the same dimension we do. They share our physics, our chemistry, our basic relationship to cause and effect. The eye exists outside all of that, outside space, outside time, outside every framework we use to understand reality. From its perspective, our entire universe, everything we've ever known or loved or built, is just a bubble. A temporary fluctuation in a larger reality we can't perceive, an aberration that eventually gets corrected. The sky cracking isn't an attack, it's maintenance. It's the eye smoothing out a wrinkle in a fabric we can't see. We don't matter to it because we can't matter to it. We're too small, too brief, too fundamentally incompatible with the kind of existence it represents." Helena felt tears streaming down her face. "Then why does it make the deal? Why does it let you come back? Why does it seem to enjoy watching us suffer?" Elias's expression shifted, something like pity crossing his ancient young face. "That's the part I didn't understand for a long time," he said. "I thought it was sadistic. I thought it was cruel. I thought it was keeping us alive just to hurt us. But that's not it. The deal, the loops, the cycle of hope and failure, it's not entertainment. It's observation. The eye is studying us. It's trying to understand something it's never encountered before, something it didn't expect, something we have that it doesn't." Helena wiped her eyes. "What?" "Choice," Elias said. "Real choice. The ability to make decisions that aren't determined by external forces, the capacity to act in ways that can't be predicted, even by something that exists outside of time. The eye has never encountered that before. In its dimension, in its reality, everything is determined. Everything follows rules that can't be broken. Everything that happens is the inevitable consequence of everything that came before." but we're different. We can surprise it. That's why it made the deal with me. Not because it wanted to watch me suffer, because it wanted to study what I would do, how I would choose, whether I would keep trying even when trying was hopeless. It's curious. In its alien, incomprehensible way, it's curious about us. And that curiosity is the only reason any of us still exist. X the key in the lock. So what do we do? Helena demanded. If the eye is beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to fight or resist or even communicate, what can we possibly do to stop the sky from cracking? Elias looked at her with an expression that combined hope and exhaustion in equal measure. We can't stop the cracking, he said. That's impossible. The sky will crack in 4 days no matter what we do. The eye will look through. The end will begin. But we can change what happens after. The shadows surged forward, not threatening, but eager. Yes. Tell her. Tell her what we've learned. Tell her what 300 failures have taught us. The eye observes us during the ending, Elias explained. It watches closely, more closely than at any other time, because our behavior in the face of extinction is the most interesting data it can collect. Usually we panic, we pray, we fight, we despair. We go through all the stages of grief in compressed, accelerated form, and the eye watches it all with whatever passes for fascination in a being that exists outside of emotion. But this time we're going to do something different. This time, instead of reacting to the ending, we're going to use it. Helena frowned. Use it? How? The moment of cracking is the moment when the barrier between dimensions is thinnest, when the eye's attention is most focused, when everything is in flux. For a fraction of a second, the eye isn't just observing us. It's connected to us. It has to be, to unmake us, to erase us. It has to touch what we are at the deepest level. And in that moment of contact, we can touch it back. Helena felt something shift in her understanding, a crack forming in her comprehension of what was possible. Touch it back? The echoes, Elias said, gesturing at the shadows surrounding them. 8 billion human consciousnesses, compressed into their final moments. All that fear, all that love, all that desperate, furious human emotion. When the eye reaches through to erase us, we're going to flood it with everything we are. Not to hurt it. You can't hurt something that exists beyond pain. But to show it, to force it to experience, just for a moment, what it's like to be us. What it's like to love and lose and hope and fail. What it's like to exist in time, to know you're going to end, to choose to keep going anyway. What it's like to be human. The shadows began to pulse, a rhythm like a heartbeat, like a unified breathing, like the coordinated movement of 8 billion entities moving toward a single purpose. We've been waiting, they whispered. 300 cycles, building our strength. 300 endings, preserving our essence. 300 chances to learn what we needed to learn, and now we're ready. Now we can make it understand. Helena's heart was racing. And you think that will stop it, showing it what we feel? I don't know, Elias admitted. It might do nothing. It might just make the eye more curious. It might make things worse. But it's the only thing we haven't tried, and we need you to make it work. Why me? Elias smiled, that ancient, sad expression on his young face. Because you're the lock. I'm the key, the one who made the deal, the one who maintains the loop, the one who carries the connection to the eye that makes any of this possible. But you're the lock. In every timeline, you're the one who keeps the door from closing too soon. You're the one who holds on longer than anyone else. You're the one whose consciousness stays intact after everyone else has been erased. I don't know why. I've never known why. Maybe something in your brain is structured differently. Maybe something in your soul, if souls exist, is stronger than average. Maybe you're just too stubborn to let go. But whatever the reason, when the moment comes, when the eye reaches through and we flood it with 8 billion lifetimes of human experience, you're going to be the channel. You're going to be the connection point. You're going to be the one who holds the door open long enough for all of us to reach through. Helena stared at him, at the shadows, at the abandoned church full of the dead, who had refused to stay dead, who had accumulated through 300 cycles of extinction for this one moment. And if I fail, she asked quietly. Then we do it again, Elias said. We go back to the beginning. I wake up as a child. The echoes return with me. The sky prepares to crack. And in some future timeline, maybe we find another way. But I don't think we will. I think this is it. I think this is what we've been building toward. I think, after 300 tries, we've finally found the answer. And I think it's you. The final days. The remaining days passed in a blur of preparation and terror. Helena went through the motions of her ordinary life, seeing patients, attending meetings, pretending that the world wasn't about to end, while simultaneously preparing for something she couldn't fully understand. The echoes taught her. In dreams, in visions, in moments of altered consciousness that came without warning and left her gasping for breath. They showed her how to open herself to their presence, how to make her consciousness a conduit for theirs, how to become the lock that would hold the door open when the moment came. It was painful. It was terrifying. It was the most important thing she had ever done. Elias visited her each day, his small body containing depths she still struggled to comprehend. They talked about the ending, about the beginning, about all the lifetimes they had shared, and all the ways they had failed, and all the reasons why this time might be different. Do you remember the first time? Helena asked on the night before the cracking. The first timeline? The original ending? Elias was quiet for a long moment. Some of it, he said finally. Fragments, impressions. It's hard to separate the original from all the copies. But I remember you. I always remember you. Helena reached out and took his small hand. What happens to you? She asked. After. If this works, if we manage to change something, what happens to a 5-year-old boy who remembers 300 lifetimes? Elias squeezed her hand. I don't know, he admitted. I've never gotten past the ending. I don't know what's on the other side. But whatever it is, it has to be better than this. It has to be better than the loop. Even if I forget everything, even if I become just a normal child with a normal life, it would be worth it. To finally stop dying, to finally let go. Helena felt tears on her cheeks. I'm going to do everything I can, she promised. I know, Elias said. You always do. The thwath. The sky cracks. It happened at dawn. Helena was on the roof of her apartment building, where Elias had told her to be, the highest point she could reach, the closest she could get to the sky that was about to break open. The echoes surrounded her, invisible but present. 8 billion consciousnesses gathered for the moment they had been building toward for 300 cycles. And Elias was beside her, his small hand in hers, his ancient eyes fixed on the horizon. It's starting, he whispered, and Helena saw it, a line of light, just a thin stroke across the pre-dawn sky, as if someone had drawn with a blade made of pure radiance. The sound came next, that breathing in, that cosmic inhalation, that sense of reality itself gasping before a plunge. And then the crack widened. The sky, that membrane she had always thought was atmosphere and space and the ordinary emptiness between stars, opened, and through the gap, Helena saw the eye. It was exactly as Elias had described. Not an eye the way she understood eyes, a point of focus, a convergence of attention, a black hole of observation that pulled everything toward itself. It looked at the world. It looked at humanity. It looked at her. And in that moment of contact, that instant of connection between something infinite and something finite, something eternal and something brief, Helena understood. She understood what the eye was, what it wanted, what it had been studying for 300 cycles. It was lonely. In all its vast, incomprehensible existence, it had never encountered anything like humanity, anything that chose, anything that felt, anything that mattered to itself in the way that humans mattered to each other. And it was curious about that, fascinated by it, hungry for it in a way it didn't understand and couldn't articulate. The cracking, the ending, the cycles of extinction, they weren't maintenance. They weren't observation. They were attempts at connection, failed attempts, desperate attempts. The attempts of something so alien it didn't know how to reach out without destroying, didn't know how to touch without unmaking, didn't know any way to experience what humans had except by erasing them and hoping some fragment of their consciousness might survive the transition. The echoes understood this too. 8 billion minds pressed against Helena's consciousness, sharing her perception of the eye and the eye's perception of them. It doesn't know, they whispered. It doesn't understand what it's doing. It's like a child, a vast, ancient, incomprehensible child, trying to pick up a butterfly and crushing it in its grip. It wants what we have. It just doesn't know how to want without taking, without destroying, without ending. Helena felt tears streaming down her face. Tears not of fear, but of recognition, of compassion, because she understood something the eye had never understood about itself. It was alone. It had always been alone, and it would always be alone, unless someone could teach it how to connect without consuming. Now, Elias said beside her, his voice both a child's whisper and the accumulated authority of 300 lifetimes. Do it now, before it finishes unmaking us, before we lose the chance. Helena opened herself, opened her consciousness, opened the lock, and the echoes poured through. 8 billion lifetimes of human experience, every love ever felt, every loss ever mourned, every choice ever made, every moment of joy and sorrow and courage and fear and hope and despair that had ever moved through a human heart, all of it, all at once, flooding through Helena's consciousness toward the eye, toward the point of connection, toward the alien intelligence that had been trying to understand humanity by destroying it. The experience was beyond description. Helena felt herself dissolving, not being erased, but expanding, becoming a conduit for everything human civilization had ever been. She felt births and deaths, first loves and last breaths, triumphs and failures, everything humanity had ever experienced, compressed into a single moment of transmission, and through her, through the lock she had become, it flowed into the eye of Lay. The understanding the eye received. For the first time in its incomprehensible existence, it didn't just observe, it didn't just study, it experienced. Helena felt its reaction, a tremor that shook the fabric of reality, a convulsion of something that had never felt anything before suddenly feeling everything. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was exactly what the echoes had hoped for. Because as the eye processed the flood of human experience, as it struggled to integrate 8 billion lifetimes of consciousness into its alien understanding, it began to change. Not much, not in any way that would be visible to human perception, but somewhere in the depths of its existence, in the spaces between dimensions, in the reality that lay beyond the sky, something shifted. The eye had touched humanity, and humanity had touched back, and neither would ever be quite the same. The crack in the sky stopped widening. Helena, her consciousness stretched beyond anything it was designed to contain, felt the moment of decision, the instant when the eye chose, for the first time in 300 cycles, to do something other than unmake. It paused, considered, wondered, and then, slowly, impossibly, the crack began to close. Not completely, not yet, but the process of erasure, the unmaking that had consumed humanity 300 times before, stopped. The eye withdrew, not in defeat, not in rejection, but in thought. It needed to process what it had experienced. It needed to understand what Helena and the echoes had shown it. It needed to learn what connection meant when it didn't mean destruction. And that learning would take time, time it was willing to give, for the first time, for the only time. 14. The after Helena woke up in a hospital bed, the lights were too bright, the sounds were too loud, everything felt too real, too present, too immediate, as if she had been somewhere very far away and was only now returning to a body she had almost forgotten how to inhabit. "You're awake," said a voice beside her. She turned her head, slowly, painfully, and found Elias sitting in a chair too large for his small body. But something was different about him. His eyes, they were still dark, still old, still carrying more than any child should carry. But the weight in them had shifted. The exhaustion was still there, but mixed with something else, something she had never seen in his expression before. Hope, real hope. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Elias nodded slowly. The sky didn't crack all the way. The eye pulled back. Something we showed it made it hesitate, made it want to understand rather than just consume. The echoes? Gone, at least most of them. When you channeled them through, when you became the lock and let them all pour into the connection, they merged with the eye, became part of its understanding, part of its new capacity for experience. They're not trapped anymore, not echoes. They're something else, something that exists within the eye itself, teaching it, guiding it, helping it learn what connection means. Helena closed her eyes. 8 billion humans, 8 billion consciousnesses, merged with an alien intelligence, becoming part of something vast and incomprehensible. Was that death? Transcendence? She didn't know. She suspected no one would ever know. What about you? She asked. The loops, the deal, are you still? Elias shook his head. I don't know. I think the deal is different now. The eye isn't looking at us the same way. It's not studying anymore. It's participating in its own alien way. It's trying to be part of humanity rather than just observing humanity. I don't know what that means for me, for my memories, for whether I'll keep looping if I die. But I don't think I will. I think this is the first time the story can actually end. The first time in 300 cycles that there might be an actual after. Helena reached out and took his hand. Small, warm, human. What do you want to do? She asked. With your life. Now that you don't have to keep repeating it. Now that you don't have to keep trying to save the world. Elias was quiet for a long moment, and then, for the first time since she had met him, he smiled like a child. I don't know, he said. I've never gotten to find out. Epilogue, 10 years later. Helena Ward sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that still, occasionally made her nervous. It had been a decade since the cracking, a decade since the eye withdrew, a decade since humanity had been given a second chance, or a 301st chance, depending on how you counted. The world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. People were kinder now, not dramatically, not universally, but noticeably, as if some part of them remembered what had almost happened, what had been sacrificed to prevent it, what they had almost lost. The echoes were gone, but their influence remained, a residue of 8 billion consciousnesses that had merged with something vast, that were even now helping an alien intelligence learn what it meant to connect without consuming. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Helena thought she could feel them. Distant, changed, but not lost. Never lost. Elias was 15 now, a lanky teenager with dark hair and darker eyes that still, occasionally, held depths they shouldn't. He was in therapy. He was in school. He was doing all the ordinary things that teenagers do. And he was happy. Not perfectly, not constantly, but genuinely, authentically, humanly happy. For the first time in 300 lifetimes. He visited Helena often. They talked about everything and nothing, about school and friends and futures that he finally got to imagine without knowing they would end in extinction. They didn't talk about the cracking very often. They didn't need to. They both remembered. They both carried it. They both understood what had been risked and what had been gained. On this particular evening, Elias was sitting beside her on the porch, watching the same sunset, when he asked, "Do you think it's really over?" Helena considered the question. I think it's different, she said finally. I think the eye is different now. I think the echoes are part of it, teaching it, changing it. I think what we did, what you did, actually mattered. But over? She shook her head slowly. I don't think something like that is ever really over. The eye is still out there, still watching, still learning, and someday, maybe, it will want to connect with us again. But next time, if there is a next time, it won't be trying to consume us. It will be trying to join us, understand us, be with us. And that's different. That's worth everything we went through. Elias nodded slowly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors fade from the sky. And then Elias spoke again, his voice quiet but certain. I'm glad I don't remember it anymore. Helena turned to look at him. The loops, the endings, the 300 times I watched everyone die. I used to remember all of it, every failure, every attempt, every time I couldn't save anyone. But it's fading now, more every year, like a dream that slips away when you wake up. Soon I'll just be a normal person with a normal life. And I think that's what I was always supposed to be. Helena felt tears prick her eyes. Does that scare you? She asked. Forgetting everything you went through, everything you sacrificed? Elias smiled, that real, genuine young smile that she had only started seeing in the years since the cracking. No, he said, because you'll remember. You always do. You'll make sure the story doesn't get lost, even if I can't carry it anymore. That's what you've always done. That's what you'll always do. Helena reached out and took his hand. Larger now, nearly adult-sized, but still warm, still human, still the same hand she had held a decade ago while the sky cracked open above them. "I'll remember," she promised. "I'll never forget." And as the last light faded from the sky that had once cracked open to reveal something beyond human comprehension, Helena Ward sat with Elias Mercer on a quiet porch in a quiet town, in a world that had been given another chance. The echoes were part of something vast now. The eye was learning to love. And humanity, for the first time in 300 cycles, was moving forward into a future that no one could predict. Because that's what made them human. That's what the eye had never understood. That's what 8 billion consciousnesses had shown it through Helena's channel in the moment when everything changed. The future wasn't something to be observed. It was something to be chosen. And whatever came next, whatever new challenges or wonders or terrors awaited, they would face it the way humans always had. Together, uncertain, alive. Somewhere beyond the sky, in a dimension that human minds weren't designed to comprehend, something vast stirred. It was different now, changed. It carried within itself the memories of 8 billion lives, the echoes that had merged with it during the moment of connection, that were teaching it what it meant to exist alongside other consciousness rather than consuming it. It was learning, slowly, painfully. But learning, and as it contemplated the small blue world it had once tried to erase, it felt something it had never felt before. Something the echoes called affection. Something that made it want to protect rather than observe, to nurture rather than study, to wait rather than consume. The eye watched, but for the first time, it watched with love. And somewhere in the vast spaces between thoughts, in the silence between heartbeats of something that had no heart, a promise formed. Not to leave humanity alone forever, but to wait, to learn, to become something worthy of connection. And someday far in the future, when it had grown enough, when it had changed enough, when it finally understood what it meant to join rather than take, it would reach out again, not to end humanity, to meet them as equals, as friends, as something neither human nor alien, but something new, something that both species would become together. The sky remained closed, but it wasn't a barrier anymore. It was a door that would open someday when both sides were ready. And on that day, the child who remembered the end of humanity would finally see its beginning. Not an ending, a new beginning, for everyone, forever. Chonyend, the end. But in a quiet room somewhere, a child too young to understand woke from a nightmare and whispered, "The sky is getting heavy again." Her parents dismissed it as imagination, as children do, as children have always done. And the eye, watching from beyond dimensions, no longer with hunger, but with something closer to concern, noticed and waited and hoped. Because it was still learning, and some lessons take longer than others, and some endings are just beginnings in disguise. And the future, the real future, the one that no one can predict, was still being written. One choice at a time, one life at a time, one heartbeat at a time, forever.